Okay. So I'm doing a lot of simulations. Actually, my students and postdocs do. I haven't done a lot of simulations myself recently. And one of the things which is getting more and more important is actually you don't do just a single simulation. You do a whole set of simulations. You use different tools. And so therefore, we need to talk about simulation workflows. And that is what I want to talk about. So what is the need? So we often need many simulations to be performed. Many can mean hundreds. And you don't want to start and stop all of them, hundreds of simulations by hand. You have to develop a workflow which automatically generates all the files, does the simulation, and then actually analyzes them. Because huge data amounts are generated, and it's very hard to analyze them by hand. Is really the need. And also, a typical case where this actually essentially started is when we talk about model optimization. When you develop a new model and you want to optimize it against experimental data or against another simulation, and then you make sure that, again, you don't want to run all of these simulations by hand. This sounds like this is a relatively new idea. It actually isn't. The earliest paper I'm aware of in this field, and it's probably not the earliest ever, is from 1995. So this is literally 30 years ago. This was, you might know some of these names. So he was actually my direct PhD advisor, Florian Müller-Blate. Christian is a good friend of mine, and Wilfried van Gunsteren is one of the original developers of Gromos, which later on became Gromax. He was a professor at ETH Zurich, of course, long retired by now. And this is the first group I'm aware of who did this. And I actually got into this business already during my PhD. This is one of my first papers, probably my second or third paper. And this was, yes, we submitted it in 98, so published it in 99. So this was part of my PhD work for automatic parameterization of force fields. I actually used the simple simplex optimization. This was before Python. This was even before Perl. So that means we had to develop this as a shell. We programmed this in TC shell. I don't know if some of you are kind of TC shell bash. Yes, this was completely done via shell scripting, which was a pain in the butt. I agree. So it's easier these days. But yeah, so the idea is just a kind of you take some parameters and then you have to generate a topology, or if you took Promax, lamps, whatever. So you have to write a topology file automatically. You ideally, in order to cut down your equilibration short, you look for a potentially similar simulation you have done before. Then you start an equilibration run. You have to identify if your equilibration is successful. So you have to do an automatic equilibration detection. And then you actually start the simulation run, you evaluate the simulation. And this is really kind of the fundamental idea when you do these workflows. You want to have no human intervention at all. This there is one step missing on this old work. Anybody has an idea which step is missing, which you would need these days?
Minimization.
Sorry?
I don't see a minimization step. I see.
That's the equilibration.
Okay.
Submitting this into a queue on a high-performance computer and getting the data back from there. This was literally run on a desktop for 6 weeks. all shell scripted. Nowadays, of course, you have to additionally develop your script to submit it to the queue, get the data back, potentially submit the analysis script to the queue, back and forth. So that's an additional complication. And I just want to talk about an application where we actually had to do a number of workflows. This is already 6 years ago. So this was work which I did when I was in Davis. Some of you might still be familiar with some of these names, Shanley and Dehan. They were graduate students in my group. Shanley is now professor at San Jose State. Ihan works for Lam Research in the modeling division, both in the Bay Area. So they were both material students, so this is a classical material science application, but a number of different workflows were needed, and that's why I took this example. A little bit of the scientific background. It's about reactive ion etching. Who knows what reactive ion etching is? Okay, not many. So essentially, you want to produce a chip. And in order to produce the chip, you have to remove silicon in some areas from the chip in order to build the different interconnects, etc. So, and you want to do that very straight down. You don't want to undercut, you want to do it very straight. So what you do, you bombard the silicon wafer with ions, which react part of the layer away, and then you form these features. That's the fundamental idea. That's a scientific problem. Question here really is, as I said before, one area is, for many of your simulation problems, one simulation code is not enough. You might need DFT and reactive molecular dynamics in this case. You might have MD with different models on different length scales. So you have different tools which need to interact with each other. That again is when a workflow is needed. You write an automatic workflow which takes the output of one simulation, reformats it because normally it's not directly readable by the next. They want their different, everybody has their different standards for force fields, etc. So you read from one code, you take that output, you generate the output for the next code, etc. Therefore, I chose this problem because we have a number of different codes actually. In this case, we do molecular dynamics and we do density of functional theory. This is the first part. This is an optimization. We have a bond order potential. This is in this case not VXFF. Some of you might have heard me talk about VXFF before. This is a Rebo potential. And in this case, we did density functional theory calculations. So that data, and now we need to develop a reactive model which reproduces the same data as the density functional theory, and then simulate that on the larger scale. Well, that was the first workflow which was needed in this case. Obviously, this is how MD works. The main difference in this case is that these are not two-body potentials. As this is a reactive model, they have much higher correlations in there. So the force field on an individual atom depends on its neighborhood. If there are other atoms around it, this is relatively standard in the metals world, because an iron atom depends very, very differently, for example, if it's surrounded by other iron atoms versus it's surrounded by other oxygen atoms. In one case, it has delocalized electrons, and it's a metal. In the other case, it's an electron. It's not an electron. It's an insulator. You have iron oxide. It's an insulator. So therefore, this all, and then at the same time, this is all reactive. So we need to talk a bit about optimizations. As I said before, in order to automatically optimize a force field, you need, in a workflow, you need one number which characterizes the quality of the force field. Because your algorithm needs to know how good your force field is. It needs to be able to rank order different force fields. So what you need a mapping of your force field on your target number, on your quality. Well, essentially, you need to define an error landscape. So that is the same anyway optimization. Problem in this case, this is in contrast to the most optimization problems you are aware of, you do not know the function to be optimized. You don't know that analytically. Meaning, evaluating the function means doing a simulation, evaluating it, calculating all different observables you care about, then make out of all of these different observables one final number which defines the quality of the force field. So you have an extremely high dimensional error landscape. Technically, you have to write this as, if you want to do the math, you have one number which depends on all the force field inputs. So very high dimensional optimization problem where you do not know analytically the function. Means you cannot do anything with you cannot do anything with derivatives, because if you don't have the function, you cannot derive it. So it's a workflow which was developed by my graduate student Josh Dietz in 2014. In this case, we have the additional problem. As I said, it's this very high dimensional problem, particularly in reactive force fields. So we have 192 parameters in this case, which were optimized. So you have a 192 dimensional optimization space. So you want to do that, if possible, in parallel. If you want to play with 192 parameters, so we actually used, in this case, 64 processors in parallel. So we were running 64 simulations in parallel, evaluating all of them, doing that 3 times. So we're doing 192. We did 192 simulations at every optimization step. For one optimization step, we did 192 simulations, and then decided, chose the local optima, developed the next 192, and in the end got a force field which we don't know if it's the optimum. We cannot even prove that because we don't know the topology of the error landscape. So we only know if we got a force field which we know that works. So this is a very, from a mathematical standpoint, kind of unsatisfactory option, but it's the only one we have. So we had a master process which took care of all the developing of the next force. So this one developed 100 at every step, 192 force fields, 192 force field files, sent 3 of them to each of the 64 processors, sent at each step 64 jobs into the queue to run on different machines, to different processors, got the data back, did the next 64, did the next 64. At that point, analyzed all of them, generated the next step. So this is what's happening in this case. So again, it's a global optimization. We have one error function, as I said. This is typically a square distance to your properties you care about. This might be density, this might be heat capacity, this might be some kind of energy, whatever. And then they might have different weights. In this case, we have two classes, the K's and the E's. And in this particular case, these ones have a weight which is 80 times bigger than this one, because the differences to the target value might be lower. And of course, you want to have square differences, that there is, if the experimental data or whatever you have is reached, that this error function is lower, and in any other case, it's higher. So what we then did, we validated this. That's the next step. If you develop a force field, you learned it via whatever tool you have. And then you need to validate it with data, typically, normally, with data you have not optimized on against. So this is after you have run all your optimization. Your workflow gives you an answer. And as you said, this one answer is not the optimal answer, because the optimal answer doesn't exist. And it's also normally not a transferable answer. So if you go to a different problem, you might have a different answer. So we calculated now using this reactive force field, these germanium chlorine clusters, calculated their energy, and did this both with density functional theory and with this Tursoff, which is this type of reactive MD force field. You see that the numbers are not the same. The main important part is the rank order of these energies have to be the same. Otherwise, you are getting the wrong physics. So we did all of these calculations here. We did standard density functional theory. We calculated our different energies. Then we actually did a larger system. Again, with density functional theory, to look at how the surface actually looks like. This is a bulk germanium, and these are the surface. This is looking from the top. So the green ones are on top. So you see that the green ones are actually, the structure at the surface is different from the bulk. That's another thing you have to take into account when you have surface problems. I said I chose this problem because it has a lot of pitfalls where you can fall into. And then after the simulation, you see that the surface reconstructs completely. So this is, at this point, we can actually start the simulation. Yet this. And these are the different radial distribution functions, etc. Now, what you really want, as I said, you want to etch this. So you want to send, typically what they do, they send a high energy ion into the system to break up the structure locally to make it easier to etch. And we did this for 5 eV, 10 eV, 25 eV, or 50 eV. Each of these things, each of these snapshots I will show in a second, is after 200 independent simulations. Because every ion be sent to the system is an independent new, very short, but it's an independent simulation. So what you see here is the result of 800 short simulations. Again, nobody wants their graduate student to write 800 input scripts and start 800 simulations per hand. That is not the point. You want to write this, and you want to have the script, say 200 with 5 EV, 200 with 10 EV, 200 with 25 EV, and 200 with 550 EV. And then you get the results. And for whatever reason, there is one slide missing. The one slide which I actually wanted. 1 second, I'll try. There's one slide actually missing in this case. I'll try to, okay. Yes, I'll, for whatever reason, okay. So, because every simulation is this. First, so this is the surface slab. So this surface slab has to be brought to, first you do a simulation to bring it to the right temperature. Because surface temperature is one of your control parameters. Then you bring gas atoms in. Few at a time. And here in this example, only one, but few at a time. Then you do a NVE simulation of the gas-solid interaction. So you let the gas atom bombard the surface, let it interact with the surface, and leave again. Of course, one single gas atom doesn't do much damage to the surface, so therefore you don't see much. But if you do this 200 times, you get this. So therefore, this is 200 simulations for each of them, for all of these different temperatures, the different energies. And now you need to do this on top of that for different temperatures, because these are the two control parameters you actually have in the experiment. It's the temperature of the surface and the energy of the atom being bombarding in. So therefore, you need all of that. I have a little bit more to talk about. This is part of Saswadi's. This is a project which Brad Harris started and Saswadi is now working on. And there we are working actually on 3D printing of lipids. Again, we have some ideas of workflow development in there as well. So first, you have to think about what do we actually want to simulate? In this case, we are simulating a droplet, or actually a small piece of material on a surface, and you want to have it dried. So what is the problem with when you dry something? That each simulation has a different number of particles, because the solvent concentration decreases from one simulation to the next. So you do a lot of simulations, all with different numbers of particles. That is the fundamental problem. So this is actually how the experiment looks like. So they do this in experiment, and then they dry it, and then they get these kinds of structures. We choose the Martini level. So this is how a lipid is represented. You have 12 beads for a phospholipid. And then exactly you have this system where in the beginning you have a lot of solvent around, and this is actually ethanol and glycerol. And then you remove, say, from here to here, from C to E or from D to F. You remove more and more of the solvent, and you see that the structure is changing completely. And in this case, actually the development, that's why I have this slide in here, the development of the workflow was actually a paper in itself. So this was part of Brad's PhD thesis, was published in 2023. And this is now on GitHub. So if anybody of you wants to do simulation of drying something, you can use this. This is a generic wrapper, a generic workflow wrapper, which runs around your actual simulation software. This can run with LAMPS, this can run with Chromax. There might be some very miniature details if you want to use another tool. So essentially, you start, you generate your structure, you do energy minimization, and you go through, you do the production run, you do the final frame, and then you delete piece of the solvent. The problem is now, if you do something which is dry, which you want to try something, so you have a fish, simplest case, you have sugar and water. When you remove a water, which water do you remove? You normally, at least in the beginning, remove a water which is not in one of the solvation shells of the sugars. So what this wrapper in this case does, it analyzes the structure, it identifies the waters which are not bound to any of the water or other solvent, and in many cases ethanol. You have to identify that. And again, this is nothing you can do by hand. You cannot sit there and go through thousands or tens of thousands of molecules. Oh, which ones do I take out? This is not possible. That is why you need a workflow. So you're taking these out. Now, of course, your next simulation has a different topology, has different input files. So you need the topology. Your workflow needs to write these files, send the next simulation, let it equilibrate, send it to the cluster, start over again. And if you go, we typically remove at most 5% of solvent at a time. And if it goes towards the end, only 1% of solvent at a time. So to try one box, you need about 30 simulations. For one data point, you need 30 simulations. That means we had to run now essentially workflows of workflows. So this was just for one data point, you had the 30, and now you write a workflow around this to perform this at a number of different conditions. This is all essentially the same temperature and pressure. If you need to change that, now you are easily in hundreds of simulations. And then we need to analyze all of them. What you see here, each of these, this is now, again, same temperature, same pressure. But these are 4 different conditions. This is different surfaces, hydrophilic, hydrophobic, pure ethanol, ethanol glycerol system. And you see in the end, the morphology is very different. And we are only showing 5 simulations each, but I think in each case it was about 30 simulations. So what you see here on this slide is 120 simulations, 120 fully independently performed simulations. Again, by running the workflow 4 times, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. So this is really what I wanted to talk about today. Okay. Any questions?
Professor, when you're talking about error functions and talking about how you need, you optimize the error function for your final values. What if you don't know what final values you want out of your, what if you're doing a preliminary search for values for a matrix?
No. You know the target. You know what material you want to study. You know the material's properties, And if you don't know the material's properties, you have to say you only can develop an MD force field if you know what the target is.
Okay. I'm thinking of a non-materials problem, but I'm just thinking of this optimization for like another feature matrix that I want to develop. But I haven't run parallel optimization like this yet. So I'm thinking of like implementing this for the features that I want. But then because there's no reference experimental or computation for what that optimization should look like or what that final value of the z function would look
you have to optimize against some known value,
like.
and then some known property, and then of course other properties which are not known. You can analyze from it, but you can only optimize against known values.
Okay.
The only other way I could imagine is you, at that point, essentially do a few different simulations with different parameters and kind of do if you're looking at mechanistic, kind of a consensus mechanism.
Yeah.
That is possible, yes. But again, then you really need to study a huge amount of parameters, and you don't really so essentially you want to do a de novo mechanism development.
Yeah.
Then essentially you need a whole set of different independent parameters and essentially say, okay, in this parameter space, we get this mechanism. In this parameter space, you get this mechanism. And then you have to figure out what the different parameters actually mean.
Okay. I think my problem is very similar to what you're saying. But yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. It's actually very helpful. I was thinking about this while you were talking. It's very helpful to what I'm going to do, hopefully.
Any other questions in person or Zoom?
It's just like a question, like, so if I dissolve like a protein in a solvent and I use a simulation to take the solvent out, and can I like get like how many like secondary structure like the remaining protein has, or?
Yes, that is exactly what Chedevapa will do for you.
Oh.
So it will perform all these simulations for you. You can specify how quickly you want to try it, how quickly you want to take the solvent out. That is and you can say, okay, you either want to do this with shrinking box or with shrinking density.
Oh.
So that is what Chedevapa will do for you. We have done this for example, for sugar in water atomistically. That is what and if it doesn't do exactly what you need to do, this is GitHub. So you of course can adapt it to what your specific needs is. And of course, these days they are all written in Python.
Oh, and sorry. So is there like a solvent only like water, or I can choose like other? Oh, okay.
No, we have done water, we have done glycerol, we have done ethanol. You just need to define it as that you can even do mixed solvents, but then you have to essentially specify what is the relative evaporation rate.
Yeah.
We've done that before. We have done mixed solvents and specify, like here in the glycerol ethanol case, we have a relative evaporation rate. Ethanol evaporation rate is known to be higher. You can specify that. I'm not sure how many solvents the code supports at this point, how many different solvents at a time, but that again would be an easy generalization. But it definitely does at least 2.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. So, I mean, in the recent years, we've, especially in the last year, seen a huge surge in the rise of foundational models for machine learning potentials, where we can actually start running instead of running DFT for a training data set, we can essentially run an MD simulation out of the box using those potentials and then correct for them with DFT. So I think my question is that with that, is there a will it be valuable, or will it add value if you're trying to interface the DFT plus MD workflows in today's time?
Yes. One of the major advantages I haven't mentioned yet is reproducibility. Because the problem is if you do this all by hand, you have to whatever workflow is described in the paper, whatever the graduate student is doing will never be 100%. The next student doing it will never be 100% the same. If you have a well-defined workflow, you can do well-defined changes to it. That is one of the main, and then you can even, as you can publish it, but sometimes it's very difficult to understand what you actually did. So you're running 500 simulations and you run them all by hand, and you are taking the human error factor out. In this case, either all are right or all are wrong. Of course. So if you mess up and you mess up 500 simulations, bad luck. Your PI will not be happy that how many computer hours you burned for that. So you want to test that before. But then that is the otherwise it's not that you mess up 2 or 3 and in the end you kind of what happened there and you have to go back. No, you know exactly what happened in every single simulation.
Any other questions? Yeah, if not, let's thank Professor Fowler one more time. Yeah. Yeah, great presentation.
Thank you.